So, if you want to follow me today in your Bibles, and I would hope if you can read, you would follow along with me. You get a double bang out of it that way. You not only hear it, but you see it. And I'm in 2 Kings and studying the life of the prophet Elisha right now. And he is called over and over again a man of God. Man of God. A man of God. In fact, when three kings actually were facing perhaps their own deaths, one of them named Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, said, "Isn't there a prophet of the Lord that we can inquire of?" And one of the servants said, "Well, here's Elisha, the son of Shaphat, the man who poured water on the hands of Elijah." Isn't that a glamorous position? He poured water on the hands of Elijah is what he was known for. But he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And the man that's too big for a little place is actually too little for a big place. And so he was faithful in just doing that little simple task of perhaps pouring water on his master's hands and then drying them, serving him in other ways, I'm sure. But he was known as a man, it says that in 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 11. And that's not my text today, but just for the reference of it, it says, Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not a prophet of the Lord that we may inquire of the Lord by him?" And one of the kings of Israel's servants answered and said, "Here's Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah." And Jehoshaphat said, "The word of the Lord is with him." He was known as that also, not just for pouring water on the hands of his master, but the word of the Lord was with him. What are you and I known for? What legacy are we going to leave this world? How are we known now? How will we be known when it's all said and done? That ought to be a concern of yours. If you're a believer, you ought to want to attain to Hebrews 11. We ought to want to live our lives to where we could attain to the chapter 11 of Hebrews, that by faith we did this or that or whatever. Anyhow, so where I left off Friday night was where I'll just tell you the story to set the stage. The prophet Elisha apparently traveled a certain direction back and forth in his travels, and there was a woman at a place called Shunem, and she was known as a great woman. And she saw this guy going by her house, and she said, "Why don't you come in and have a bite to eat?" So then she said to her husband, she said, "I perceive that this is a holy man of God that passes by us continually. Let's make a little prophet's chamber for him. A little bed, a little stool, a little lamp, a little chair, so that every time he comes by, he can stop at our house." And I'd be willing to bet that's where some of the churches that have a cottage or a chamber or a little house on their property probably got it from that idea. And so, as it was, this prophet Elisha and his servant Gehazi, when they would go by her house, they would stop in, and one day he was laying in the bed that she fixed up for him. I picture him probably like kicked back, feet, crossed, maybe his head propped up. And he said to Gehazi, this woman's been taking care of us with great care, man. We need to do something for her. He said, "Call the Shunammite in." And she came, and he said, what can be done for you? Do you want me to speak to your king, to the captain? She said, "I dwell amongst my own people." I think she was saying, I'm all right. I'm okay. And Gehazi then said, "She ain't got no son, and her husband's old." He said, "Call her in again." She came and stood in the doorway. And he said, "According to the time of life, thus saith the Lord, you're going to have a son." And she said, "Don't mess with me, man of God." That's the Jim Davis translation. Amen. "Don't mess with me like that, man of God. Don't tease me like that. Don't say that." he said, no, according to the time of life, you're going to embrace a son. And she did. And then one day, the scene switches then to him probably as a little boy, goes to work one day with his dad out in the field. And while he's out in the field, he says, my head, my head. And his father said, hey, take him back to his mother. And they took him back to his mother, and she probably bounced him on her knee until noontime, and he died in her arms. So she took that baby and her boy, little boy, and took him up to the prophet's bed and put him in the prophet's bed and shut the door, and then went to her husband and said, I need to go see the man of God. He said, why? It's not a new moon or a feast day. She said, it'll be okay, just send me a servant. I need one of the asses also. Then she told her driver, she said, drive and slack not. Anyway, Elisha sees her coming. He said to Gehazi, oh, yonder comes this Shunammite woman. And she comes, and he sends his servant Gehazi to greet her. And is everything okay? Is your husband okay? Is the child okay? And she said, everything's fine. She don't want to talk to no servant. She wants the man of God. And so she comes and she falls down at Elisha's feet, and Gehazi went to shoo her away, and the prophet said, no, don't do that. Something's wrong with her, and God's hidden this from me. And her heart's heavy. Her soul's grieving. And then she told him what happened. So he said to his servant, take my stick and go to the woman's house and go in and lay my staff on the boy, lay it on his feet, on his body. And she said, I ain't leaving you. I want you. I don't want your stick. I don't want your servant. Doesn't say that, but that's what she was saying. She said, I want you. I'm not leaving without you. So he makes his way. In the meantime, Gehazi goes to her house, lays his walking stick, and there's nothing. Child's dead. And so she comes back and says, child's dead. So he comes in, and he goes in, and he shuts the door, and he prays. And then he takes, and he lays on top of the child, and he puts his hands to the child's hands, and his face to the child's face, his eyes to the child's eyes. And the child's body began to warm up a little. And then he got up and he walked back and forth through the house. And then he went back in again, and he laid and stretched himself on the child. And the child sneezed, it says, 7 times, and opened his eyes. And he picks the boy up, and he calls the woman in. He said, here's your boy. And she said, if you look at it with me, because now my stage is set for today. Look at chapter 3. This is 2 Kings chapter 3. No, 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 37. 2 Kings, it's actually the story of Naaman that I want to get to. But I keep thinking, all morning I've been being tortured by this voice saying, you did that every time you came there. I don't know if I did or not. I can't remember, but who cares? I'm still getting new stuff out of it myself, so I'm hoping you all will too, even if the pastor just did it for Sunday school or whatever. Amen. I remember one time my brother had a thing at his church called Preacher Boys, and we all had to come there. It was a Saturday affair. We all had to have a sermon ready, and we all had to put our name on a piece of paper and put it in a hat. And then when they reached in and drew your name, you had to stand up and deliver your 20-minute message. And I went there, and the guy, right before they pulled my name, the guy got up and had my passage. And I'm like, oh my, oh no, now what am I going to do? But you know what? His take on it wasn't nothing like what God showed me. So I got right up after him and said, turn to the same passage, and I did what God showed me. So we ought not be afraid, I guess, and all I'm doing, I don't have a calendar and plan. I don't save messages. This is just where I happen to be today in my life at City Gate. And so this is the next step. This is where I left off Friday night with verse 37 of chapter 4, which says, then she went in and fell at the prophet's feet and bowed herself to the ground, took up her son, and went out. Verse 38. Elisha came again to Gilgal. This is 2 Kings 4:38. Came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said unto his servants, set on the great pot. Let's have something to eat. Problem is, there ain't nothing. It's a dearth, meaning a famine. So they all go out, they're looking for whatever they can shred into this pot to try to get something to eat. Verse 39, one of them went out into the field and to gather herbs, and he found a wild vine, and he gathered thereof of the wild gourds a whole lapful, and came and he shred them into the pot. And they didn't know what they were. And so they poured it out for the men to eat, and it came to pass as they were eating the pottage, they cried out and said, "O thou man of God, there's death in the pot." And they couldn't eat it. And he said to them, "Bring meal." And they brought some meal to him. And he cast the meal in the pot. And he said, "Pour out now for the people that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. I think the point is that it doesn't matter whether it was meal or whatever, rice, or it was just a means. It was a miracle. Remember what this prophet asked for the day that it was revealed to all the sons of the prophets that Elijah was going to be taken away that day from the earth into heaven, not into Abraham's bosom. He was going to be taken into heaven. And somehow that was made known to all the sons of the prophets and schools of the prophets. And that day when they got to almost the final destiny, the prophet Elijah said to his understudy, "Ask me for something before I'm taken away from you." And Elisha didn't even bat an eye. He said, "I want a double portion of your spirit." And Elijah said, "You asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I go, you got it." And a few more steps, and all of a sudden it says there appeared a chariot of fire, not on fire, of fire, and horses of fire. And I guess it must have drove right by them and caused them to be separated from each other. And then Elijah went up into heaven by a whirlwind, and his prophet's garment fell off to the ground. And Elisha took it and picked it up, and he said, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof." And he took that mantle and he smacked the waters, and they parted here and there just like his master had done. And the sons of the prophets that were looking from a distance said, "Wow, the spirit of Elijah doth now rest on Elisha." So you would expect to see a whole lot of miracles if that's the case. And that's what we're saying. One after another, after another, after another. He just he was able to tell a barren woman, "You're going to have a son," and she did. And then he just made this poisonous pot edible. Look at the next one, verse 42. "And there came from Baal Shalisha, and a man came and brought the man of God." This time around, that's what's jumping off the page to me. I'm sure I've saw it before, but it didn't jump at me like it is this time. Man of God. Man of God. What a title. What a thing to be known as. Man of God. It's all over these stories. Man of God. You'll hear it again before I'm done. It says, he came and said, "Man of God." Or he brought to the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, full ears of corn, and a husk thereof. And he said, "Give to the people that they may eat." And his servitor said, "What should I set before 100 men?" He said again, I said, "Give to the people that they may eat, for thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and they'll leave thereof." And so they set before the people, and they did eat, and there was food left over according to the word of the Lord. Like Jesus, kind of, in the New Testament. Every time he fed, those miracles that are recorded, like the feeding of 5,000, it's recorded also that there was more left over than what he started with. Every time. And so that tells us there was someone serving lunch that day when Jesus was on earth. It wasn't no mere man. But this tells us here that this prophet had the power of God in his life, and he could, I guess, he was so in tune with his master from above that he could speak dogmatically like that, and it comes to pass. True prophet. I think I said this Friday night at the mission, but one of the greatest compliments that I ever got in my life actually came from a woman in prison that wasn't all there, and she was also known for being a very loose young woman with her body. But she come to my Bible study a couple times, kind of played with her hair, and I didn't think she was even paying attention. But I remember one day she saw me in the hallway and she said, "Hey, Bible man!" And I thought, my goodness, what a compliment. Amen. Bible man. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man. Look at this carefully with me. I'm going to pick this apart. I want you to see this with me. This is the story. I wrote a little introduction here last night. I wrote Naaman. His name means supposedly pleasantness. He's the Syrian commander of the armies of a man named Ben-Hadad II, apparently, the son of Hazael. And he's a great man. But look at verse 1 again. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Assyria, was a great man with his master, and, let me get my glasses, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria, and he was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive a little maid out of the land of Israel. Out of Israel, a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, this little maid that they stole out of her homeland, took her captive, she said to Naaman's wife, "Would to God that your husband, my Lord, were with the prophet that's in Samaria, for he would recover your husband of his leprosy." And somebody went and told his Lord, saying, "Thus and thus said this little girl, this maid that was taken from the land of Egypt," land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, "Now when this letter is come to thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may recover him of his leprosy." And it came to pass that when the king of Israel read the letter, he rips his clothes, and he said, Am I a God? Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send a man to me to recover him of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, how this man seeks a quarrel against me. This guy's messing with me. And it was so that when Elisha, the man of God, there it is again, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, and that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him now come to me, and he shall know that there's a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariots. Remember, this guy's the commander of an army. And he ain't nobody to mess with. He apparently is bad on the battlefield. He's a victor. God, it says, gave him victory on the battlefield. So you can picture probably a big man and strong man. Maybe he wasn't a big man. Maybe he was a small man. But he was a man by no means a man, a real man. I remember my brother's wife told me that after my brother died, she said, your brother was a man's man, Jim. That was what his wife's take was on my brother. And she was a prostitute and a heroin addict in New York City for 17 years when he met her. And yet she said my brother was a man's man. And well, I've got to watch what I say. I'm in church. I'm not at City Gate. So I won't say nothing. So, he said, send him to me. So he comes to the prophet's house. Can you see him standing there at the door? He just pulled in his chariot, horse-driven chariot. He's got servants with him. He's probably got his soldier's attire on. The fact that he's a commander of an army, then he probably looks that way. But he also has got some problems that makes him unclean and not fit to be in society. And Elisha sends a messenger to him. This is what jumped off the page to me this morning that didn't ever really connect for me all the times through my life that I've had this passage in front of me, whether it be by another preacher or by my own self studying and speaking. This guy, the prophet Elisha, for some reason, has a pattern of sending somebody else or trying to. He's tried to send Gehazi to the Shunammite woman's house, and she wasn't going for that. She said, I want you. But he tried to send his servant. And here he sends someone else. Naaman wants to see the prophet. I think he wants to actually see the prophet. If nothing else, curiosity maybe. Anyway, the prophet doesn't come out of his house. He sends somebody, a messenger, steps outside and says, verse 10, he says, go wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and your flesh will come again to you, and you'll be clean. That's what Elisha sent the man out his door to say to this commander. Go and dip yourself, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and your flesh will come again to you, clean. Your leprosy will be cleansed. Look at verse 11. Naaman explodes. He goes ballistic. He loses his temper. It says he went away and he said, behold, I thought that he would at least come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. He says, and besides, are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, where he's from, better than these waters in Israel? Apparently the Jordan River is dirty, I've been told at times. It could actually look like coffee running. So he's like, man, the rivers back in my land are cleaner than this stuff. And it says that he went away, he turned, verse 12, and went away in a rage. I said this Friday night at the mission, unrelated, anger resteth in the bosom of fools. I showed my wife that verse once when we were feuding with our neighbors over our land, a boundary dispute. We were in court, and my wife went up one night in a fit of anger and took the rear view mirror of the neighbor's pickup truck and bent it around, and then her heart smote her for going that far. I know none of you would ever do anything like that, But the Davises are crazy a little bit, so. Anyway, known to be, could be, possibly be. And then her heart smote her, kind of like David's heart when he sawed off part of Saul's skirt, and then it says his heart smote him just for doing that. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, there's a verse that says that anger rests in the bosom of fools. She said, where's that at? And I gave her the reference, and she put it on where? The refrigerator. Yes, everything that's important goes on the refrigerator. It was an index card. It's not there. I went and looked for it last night after I got home. It's not there anymore. But anger rests in the bosom of fools. He that is soon angry. There's all kinds of proverbs that you know, be ye angry and sin not, and let not the sun go down on your wrath, and so on. So there's all kinds of verses that are against, you know, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. This guy, he explodes, and he says he didn't even come out and face me. I think he felt disrespected because of his power. And so he goes away in a big rage. But thank God there's always somebody around that's got a little bit of sense. A servant or someone. Because in this case, notice verse 13, one of his servants came near and said, my father, if the prophet had bid you do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much then, rather, when he says to you, wash and be clean? And it doesn't say that he said anything, but I wonder if he didn't go, yeah, you're right. And verse 15, he returned to the man of God. No, verse 14, don't miss this, Jim. Put your glasses on. And he went down and dipped himself 7 times. I try and picture that. You know, try like the squishy bottom of the, and he goes down and he goes under the water, and maybe it's cold. Whoa, man, that was cold. Whew. And then does it the second time, but on the 7th time, he comes up out of the water. Look what happens. It says, let me read 14 again. When he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan River, according to the saying of the man of God. There it is again. I missed that one. I was underlining all of them. I missed that one. That's what I mean about the Bible, folks. If you don't know it, let me introduce you to an electric book, a living book, and things like that where, you know, I guess if it wasn't that way, I would have gotten bored with my Bible, because I burn everything out that I touch. Everything. I'll drive things way. I'll make everyone that watches me sick until I'm finally sick of myself. That's how far I go when I go. And I can't help it. I was born that way. Who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou received it not? 1 Corinthians 4:7. So that tells me that whatever I've become, other than my sinfulness, but how I'm driven, my personality, the fact that I can't do anything in a half measure, God made me this way. And so, here he comes, up out of the water, the man of God, just like the man of God said, and his flesh came again, the end of verse 14, like the flesh of a little child. I bet he even smelled like baby magic. No more leprosy. Now he's a complete man. Now he's probably going to have to watch his pride, because now there's no reason to not get a big head, because he's bad. He's the commander of an army. He's honorable. He's a great man with his master. His master loves him and trusts him. And he's a mighty man in valor. Now he's no longer a leper. In verse 15, he returned to the man of God with all his company. And he returned to the man of God. Wow, there it is again. I missed that one. He returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, behold now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But the man of God said, as the Lord liveth, before whom I stand. You know, that's what Elijah said too. The first time Elijah shows up in the pages of Scripture, 1 Kings 17:1, he claims to be a man who stands in the very presence of God. And now his understudy says the same thing. As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand. He said, I ain't taking nothing from you. Nothing. He said, I am not going to take anything from you. And it says, and he urged him to take it, but he refused. Just like Abraham said to the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, I ain't taking from a thread to a shoe latchet from you, lest you say you made Abraham rich. In other words, I'll take mine from above, please. I'm not going to take it from you. You're not going to. There used to be a man who you started coming into the old City Gate building. He was a veteran. His name was Thomas Tinley Jr. He had a flat top haircut. It looked like his nose had been broke about 10 times. He was about 5'1". And he would come into Coatesville around time when his government check would hit, and he would go into the Crystal Bar and the Midway Bar. And the first time we ever met him, he come walking into City Gate. We saw him like looking up, and he come in the door, and there were men, probably from the bar, that were pacing back and forth outside our window, waiting for him to come out, because he probably was in there flashing his cash. And every time he came in after that, he called me father. And I could say, I'm not your father, man. I'm Jim. Okay? I'm just Jim. So he probably was used to Catholic priests. And he would always try to peel some of his money and give it to me. And I wouldn't take a dime from him. And back then, I wasn't doing very well at all financially. But I did not want to be, because I'm sure all the fathers that he ever did that to probably said, thank you, Tom. Bless you, my son. Here, I got a couple more, another blessing even, you know. They probably picked him clean, and so would the men outside those doors have picked him clean. Roxanne let me use her Volvo, the woman I worked with, and I took him down to Al Mantini's, that dive down in Exton, and got him a room with his money, and got him into a room safely, and then I drove away. And I remember I had to put a trash can between his legs because he was throwing up all the way down. Because one time he came in our bathroom, and he was normal, and he came back out of the bathroom like, just drunk as he could be. He must have had a flask on him or something. Anyway, I wouldn't take his money because I did not want to be associated with that. And there's many times I've had people and opportunities where somebody, if you want to give me something like, my office is filled with souvenirs that I've accepted from people. I just don't take money because you're not buying me. I'm not for sale. Not going to be associated with you. You're not going to be able to say, oh, he's about money. I have my own. I don't need yours. So, and by the way, that wasn't all money. That's my driver's license, all my cards and stuff. There's a $2 bill and a couple ones. And if you have to know the truth too, I do have a money clip with a $2 bill and a couple ones, a 5, 2 5s. but I got money. It's mine. And I doubt that it's worth taking my life over. But I ain't going to hand it over to you willingly, so you can figure that out. Thy servant will, Naaman says, let me finish this up, verse 17. Naaman said, shall there then not, I pray thee, be given to me? He said, if you're not going to take nothing from me, he said, then I'd like to have 2 mules loads of this dirt from here, so that your servant henceforth will never offer again sacrifice to any other gods but to the Lord. In this thing the Lord, and then he's going to confess something that he knows he's going to go back to. Some people would cause or use something like this to keep them from going all the way with the Lord. You have maybe some besetting sin and you think, I can't serve the Lord. I got this or that. Let God take care of that. You come just as you are. Let him fix you further. Anyway, this guy says, I need you to ask, I need your forgiveness for something. Verse 18, he says, the Lord, in this thing, the Lord pardon thy servant, that when I go back home to my master, I'm going to just translate this for you. He says, listen, where I'm coming from, I'm my master's trustedest servant. When I go into the house of Rimmon, which is the false god of the Syrians, the thunderer, it said when I looked it up in a commentary. The house of Rimmon, the thunderer. He said, I know this, when I go back home, I'm going to have to go into that house with my master. When he leans on my hand, when I bow down with him, you have to pardon me in this because I'm expected to do that. And I'll be doing that when I go back home. And the prophet said to him, go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. And then Gehazi, the servant of Elijah, the man of God, Elisha, the man of God, said, you know what? My master spared that Syrian and not receiving of his hand what he brought. He said, but as the Lord liveth, I'm going to run after him and I'm going to get mine. And so Gehazi followed after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him, running after him, he lighted down from his chariot and he said, is everything okay? Is all well? And he said, yeah, all's well. He said, my master sent me back here saying, behold, there just came 2 men to him, even from Mount Ephraim, 2 young men and of the sons of the prophets. And he wants you to give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. And Naaman said, be content. Here, take 2. And he urged him, and he bound 2 talents of silver and 2 bags and 2 changes of garments. And them he took his servants, he laid them on his 2 servants, and that bare him before him, and he came to the tower, and he took them from their hand and bestowed. Sounds like the Naaman even sent some men to help carry this stuff back part way, and he got to the tower, and he took them from him, and he let the men go, and they departed, and he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where you been, Gehazi? He said, I didn't go nowhere. Elisha said, didn't my heart go with you when that man turned from his chariot by the way? He said, is this a time to receive? Verse 26. He said, went not my heart with you when that man turned again from his way with thee, and he turned from his chariot to meet thee? He said, is it a time to receive money and to receive garments and olive yards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and men servants and maidservants? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cleave to you and to your seed forever. And Gehazi went out of the presence of his master, white as snow, contagious.